And now I'd like to welcome here on TVP World Bartłomiej Kot from the Puławski Institute. Thanks for joining us today.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Now, so we have these potential new direction that the foreign ministry may head. I'm sure there are some changes. I'm sure there's a lot of things that will remain the same. So let's start there. What new directions do you think are going to vastly differ from that of the previous government as they were in charge of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs?
Well, so far this is actually a very foreign policy-oriented government right now. I mean, a lot of policies, a lot of activities of both the Prime Minister and the Minister for Foreign Affairs are actually a driving factor when it comes to the activities of the whole government. The fact is that we are somewhere in Europe on the map, and we haven't changed that position so far since the previous government, and this is pretty much what defines our policies right now. The Russian threat to Polish territory is still there. The war in Ukraine is still there. The fact that we are a part of the European Union is still there, and the fact that we are experiencing some internal differences, if I may say so, in the US that also define our security environment, they are still there. Therefore, what I would say is that a lot of those policies, how they shape, how they define our priorities for foreign policy, if we compare the current government to the previous government, this environment didn't change a lot. What has changed, though, is of course the way the politics are being done. The fact that we are capable of collaborating with our partners, both in the European Union, also in the US to some extent, and the fact that we are also capable of building coalitions around our priorities. And this is like the revival of the environment. Triangle is the perfect example for that.
Mr. Sikorski has been in the driving seat as foreign minister before, and I think he's probably quite well positioned to do so. Could you perhaps tell us a little bit about perhaps how he's changed since his last post as foreign minister?
Well, certainly he was way more active in the European Union, on the European Union stage. Prior to that, of course, he was always considered to be a well-known politician across Europe. But I would say that right now, I suppose that he has more of an understanding that certain policies of the Polish state are better conducted if they are conducted with the European partners and with the usage of what actually the European Union offers in terms of its competences. When it comes to our security and defense policy, the previous government was very much oriented on conducting these policies on the bilateral basis. For example, what we did with Ukraine, majority of those actions were actually based on the bilateral coordination of activities between Warsaw and Kyiv. Right now, what we are trying to do, what Poland is trying to do, is of course to Europeanize to a certain extent also the security and defense policy, which is, in my opinion, a very good direction, because of course we as Poland, we are not only a part of the eastern flank of NATO, but we are also the part of European Union, and this is also the eastern flank of European Union. What does it mean? It is a very obvious assumption from my side. Poland is spending a lot of money from its own GDP, not only to secure the NATO as an alliance, but also to secure the prosperity of the European Union. This means that, to some extent, the European Union should also bear this burden.
Absolutely. It has to be said that obviously, the previous governments and the current government, they're critical of each other. But would you say really that the previous government made a lot of mistakes when it came to its foreign policy? Because I think a lot of effort was made to build relations with European countries and also beyond Europe.
What I would say is that the directions were good. The fact that they also recognize some traits in foreign policy or security policy, the fact that they were able of communicating well in terms of what are the security priorities of Poland back then, these were all good things, and I can only praise them for that. but the truth is that you cannot conduct some policies, especially in terms of security and defense, without the cooperation and coordination with the partners. What we were experiencing also was actually, in my opinion, lack of leadership, a proper leadership on the European Union stage when it comes also to security. The duo of France and Germany right now is not in the best shape ever, if I may say so. The fact that Poland is right now back on the European Union stage and is capable of also shaping the European Union in terms of leadership, that is very much linked to security policy. This is actually a game changer, in my opinion, and game changer not only for Poland but also for the future of the European Union, maybe.
When we look at foreign policy, obviously Polish politics is very polarized. It has been for several years now. Foreign policy seems to be one of those areas where both sides could find common ground. But if we look at it a little bit closer, of course, bilateral relations with Germany are significantly different today than they were just a few months ago, as well as with the European Union. Now we have European elections coming up. Donald Tusk has come out and said that I'm translating from Poland, turnout will be most important for them in terms of this European election. So in that scope, what is at stake for the ruling coalition in these upcoming European elections? Well,
turnout is indeed a very important factor, but I would say that not from the foreign policy perspective, rather from the internal politics of Polish state. This is all about actually some traits and factors that are inside the coalition itself, and also, of course, of the current governing coalition versus the previous government. Tusk has to prove that he is capable of winning elections. Not only because of the fact that of course, when you compare the number of cities that are currently governed by the new coalition government or those parties that are a part of it, this has grown during the last local elections. To some extent, this is a success story, but we're ahead of the presidential elections as well. And in order to actually to achieve the change in that very position, I would say that Tusk has to prove that he is capable of winning elections. And in order to do so, he has to mobilize electorate. The previous government, or I would say Law and Justice, they have a very stable, solid, rock-solid electorate that always goes to the polls. This is around 30% of the voters. In order to win the elections, Tusk really has to mobilize new wave of electorate, especially the younger people who during the local elections weren't present at the polls. So therefore, from this very perspective, the turnout is important in my opinion.
And on the issues, how exactly does Mr. Tusk do that? We saw the latest poll, Ipsos poll, showed that approval rating in Poland of Brussels is only at 51%. That's the lowest in history. That gives, in my opinion, my humble opinion, that gives it gives Law and Justice quite a big advantage when it comes to Eurosceptics, and so therefore, Mr. Tusk is going to have a platform that he's going to be able to express to those voters to get out the vote.
Yes, that's true. I mean, polarizing factor is always what moves people in politics. I'm sure about that. The question is to what extent he can play actually on the European pro-European tune, because if you have like over 50%, or around 50% of people who are Eurosceptic, or I wouldn't consider them Eurosceptic, or they're skeptic when it comes to the current Brussels crowd. If you have around 50% of this kind of people, then if you play on the Euro positive tune, then you can also mobilize those who are like skeptic to the current Brussels setting. So in my very opinion, there are a couple of topics that always move people. The big question, in my opinion, is whether security is still this factor. Because we have been playing very high on security tune for right now 2 years, maybe even more than 2 years. It started with COVID, so it's more than 2 years. It started with COVID. It has continued during the war in Ukraine and is still there. So security might not necessarily be still actually something that moves people to the polls because they're used to that. They're used to high alert talks that are delivered by the politicians. So
but I think if I can just jump in, because we've got very little time, I think the Green Deal and the farmers' issues are actually the big topics at the moment that really get people going. So
absolutely,
I think that might be really what gets people either to the polls or not.
I think it's interesting to look issue by issue where the two parties or the coalition and Law and Justice, where they really stand apart and where they are sort of aligned. Because
and
I think
immigration as well is another one, right?
I do agree, although I can also tell, I mean, maybe that's a sneak peek into what will be there after the European elections. Both on the Green Deal issue and both on the migration issue, I would say that EPP would also change its own policies and the attitudes. Because as you rightfully observed, there is a certain mood around Europe currently growing. The opposition towards the Green Deal as it was delivered during the previous Commission, and also an opposition to the current moods around the migration issue. So I guess that on both of those sides, I'm not talking right now also about certain coalition building purposes that may be there after the elections, the need for example, Meloni support or something like that. But apart from that, on both of those issues, big issues, I would say that even the EPP will change a bit of their stance.
Indeed. Okay, it's been great speaking to you, Bartłomiej Kot from the Pulaski Institute. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.